Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Cameron. I'm the Vice President, Humanities and Social Sciences, and the co-host for tonight's event, Employable Me, in conversation with Danial Naqvi. As you know, well, as you may know, Employable Me is a social employability strategy set up by myself last October, where we're looking at kind of the more social aspects of employability and how students' experiences can impact their future in the workplace. So I'm just going to quickly introduce my co-host, Tiana.
Hi everyone. I'm Tiana. I'm the Vice President Communities, and I've been working with Cameron on Postgrad Fortnight, which is taking place this week and next week. Should I say a bit about it now, or should we?
Yeah, you can do.
Sure. Well, so Postgrad Fortnight, Cameron and I set it up this year. We kind of recognise that the Students' Union hasn't done enough in the past for our postgraduate students. Often we kind of focus on the undergraduate student experience. And so we've been working as part of Project Doctorate to do more to engage with and to support postgraduate students, so both PhD students and master students. So this event is one of many that's taking place this week and next week to kind of reach out to this community of students and make sure that you're kind of getting activities that we haven't really done before. So it's kind of a mixture of things like this, which is a bit more about your kind of lifestyle, your professional life, and maybe career. And then we've also got social events. So make sure to look out on our website and on our social media just to keep up to date with what else is happening for the rest of the fortnight.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiana. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Danial, who is our guest speaker for this evening, who is a postgraduate alumni from QM, but I won't introduce all of his credentials, so I'll hand it over to you, Danial, to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'll bring up my slides so you can have a look at those while I... Can you see those okay?
Yep, that's great.
Cool. All right then. Well, thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see some new faces, people that I haven't seen before. So my name is Danial. I'm a joint PhD student at the Universities of Manchester and Melbourne, where I research broadly cities, technology and sustainability. I started networking in May 2017 towards the end of an internship I was doing that led me to meet leading procurement and sustainability officers in FTSE 100 companies. My network is entirely self-made. So if you're anxious about starting, I'm here to show you that it's definitely possible. Despite having incredible parents and that could provide me and allow me to thrive, they didn't work in these industries that benefit from kind of nepotism, this kind of friendly, familial relationships that allow people to get jobs. So everything I'm telling you now is learned through trial and error. And so I hope that I can impart some wisdom on you today. So I've given this talk about 15 times already. So if you feel like you have a question, drop that in the box. No question's a silly question. Everyone's at different stages. And so it's really important to appreciate and respect that. And I'll be as helpful as I can when answering your questions later on. I've become somewhat of a central node, I guess, over the years from friends and others when it comes to networking. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And like everyone else in the COVID era, I think Cameron's just put my newsletter in the chat, so it's on cities if that's of interest to you. So let's just get started. So everything I'm saying in this is from my own perspective. It doesn't relate to any of the institutions that I belong to, and it's all through trial and error, and this is basically the kind of best of it. So you're getting some of the good stuff. So the purpose of this webinar really is to debunk the term networking and reduce any barriers to entry that you think there are or that actually exist. To do that, we're going to talk about the basics, then how to create and maintain your network. And then I have some examples from both research and from professional life I think might be of interest. So first, an introduction. Who am I? Why am I speaking to you? Why should you listen to me? I guess the first kind of reasons are that I went to university at Queen Mary. I did my undergraduate there. I also studied abroad at the University of Texas at Austin for 5 months. So I had that kind of global experience. I ended up doing my master's a little bit way up the road in UCL, and now I'm doing my PhD. So the kind of experience that I'm going to be talking to you is somewhat academic in the sense that that's how I've gained most of my networks, but ultimately this can be applied elsewhere as well, because a lot of the times my networks have helped me to get employment or to work on special projects that I otherwise may not have been able to do previously. So I mentioned earlier that I started networking in May 2017, and this is kind of the trajectory of things that I think are important that may be useful to you, to showing you how kind of long-term this sort of thing is. It's not to say that networking cannot be done in the short term, it definitely can, but this is definitely one of those longer tail strategies that you're going to want to keep in the bank instead of looking maybe for a short-term return. So my first internship was in February 2018. This I got through just applying on Indeed like everyone else. And it was super transformative, and it was one of the kind of pillar stones of why I kind of became so interested in networking after that. I did my undergraduate research in July 2018, and I traveled to Fort Worth, which is a city not too far from Austin, where I did my study abroad. And it was kind of awesome to do networking out there because it's a completely different lifestyle, and they require different things of when you're trying to build networks. Then I did another internship when I came back. So 2018 was a really busy year. From 2018 to 2019, I had various events, and I'll tell you some of the stories from those events a little bit later on. And then I did my dissertation research in London for my master's last year during the pandemic. And I'll speak to some of that in here. And then I launched my newsletter, and I want to talk to you a little bit about why passion projects are so important to networking as well. So let's start with the basics. I want to get personal here for a second, and I want you to understand that there are two things when you're looking at networking. This is probably one of the more important slides that I'm going to share with you today, and hopefully these will be shared with you afterwards, and there is a recording of this obviously, so you'll be able to go back anyway. First is kind of how you network, and the second is where. So there are definitely different methods you can use to attract an audience or build an interested following, but probably more importantly is that you must be where your target audience is to get them engaged. There is no point, for example, going on LinkedIn to engage academics. They don't live there. They don't care about LinkedIn. That's a business platform for different things. So talking about those modes specifically, LinkedIn is obviously one of the big ones. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I definitely recommend making one. If you want a template, you can look at mine. There are definitely better ones than mine, but if you need something to start, feel free to copy anything that I've got on there. It's primarily for professionals in a said industry. It's become somewhat saturated over time, so you may want to mix modes. Today, a lot of the kind of things that I'll show you focuses on LinkedIn, but a lot of what I'm going to see also applies elsewhere. Twitter is generally quite good for academics, politicians, where people feel freer to speak, that they're not tied to specific institutions like LinkedIn is. Cold email is fundamentally one of the best ways. It's an old trick, but it definitely works. And with the right structure, you could really get some success. And then Shaper, which is that kind of app in the bottom right corner there, is where I met my first mentor, and it's well worth a download. It's free to download. The way I like to describe it is it's basically like Tinder for LinkedIn. So if you kind of know what that means, it's essentially you swipe on different profiles, but it all kind of a professional. You're looking for mentorship or for an employment or to just build connections or that sort of thing. So you've got different kind of modes there. And then kind of on the method side, some people like to make content. There are certain creators out there who have benefited from networking through creating on a particular platform. Consistency and quantity are oftentimes the best way to get there. So if you don't have that sort of time, that may not be something for you. Events, both online and in person, are kind of super important. One story I'll briefly share here is July 2019. I graduated in 2019. So this is a story basically of me transitioning between undergraduate and postgrad, but also kind of figuring out if I want to go into the kind of employment world at that stage. I went to a lot of my research is to do with mobility and like transportation, that sort of thing. So I went to an event on the future of mobility in London. I was the youngest person in the room by a long shot, and I was a student that was just genuinely interested in the industry. I went over to the drinks table and in an inadvertently locked eyes in a kind of very cliche romantic movie type way with someone. And it's kind of one of those things where once that happens, you can't really move away. So we kind of got to talking, and he told me about some of the issues he was currently having with one of his clients. So my background was in geography. I understand space and kind of distribution and that sort of thing. And I also had the background in communications, as you saw when I did my kind of business intelligence internship. And his problem sounded like it blended the two. So he gave me his business card. We went our separate ways. There was no kind of commitments or anything made there. But I couldn't stop thinking about what he told me. So I went home and I wrote up a 3-page solution and I emailed it over. This is something I didn't have to do. It was just something that I felt the inclination to do, right? So this is something that I went to an event. I was looking to understand the industry. What better way for me to understand the industry than to help to solve someone's problem? And since then, we've been connected, and he's always tried to help me with anything I've got going on. So that's a really great example of how that can work. The two areas we're going to focus on today in terms of the methods is passion projects, that's the newsletter, and the research, which is the kind of MSc project that I did. So we'll come to those a little bit later on. Now, you're here as postgraduates. Congrats on getting through undergraduate. I know how painful that sometimes can be, but you're here now as a kind of postgrad, and you're probably maybe going on to employment, or you're doing your PhD or whatever it is. I want to tell you what's so important about being a postgrad and something that we undervalue about the institutions that we're a part of. Your .ac.uk or your .edu, whatever email you have, depending on where you are in the world, is an invaluable resource. At the moment, you're a student. You're being classed by companies or whoever you want to attract or target as someone who's somewhat innocent, has kind of a genuine desire to make a better world. You're not part of or a competitor group. There's no kind of threat that you pose to any kind of company, especially. And it also looks really good if companies help out students, because that's seen as kind of research and development, in some ways philanthropy, in some ways corporate social responsibility. So you're in a really privileged position here. So when you're networking, try and use your university email to do that. Even if you haven't got that long left, it's amazing how many connections you can make when you send something from a university email. Trust me, it's really, really great. Also, if you're one of those people that hasn't tried networking before because you're not sure about how you come across or the type of person that you are and how other people might see you, if you're doing something like research, for example, or if you've got a passion project, we'll talk about later, it kind of limits that insecurity. And as a postgraduate student who's gone through university, understands the kind of traditions, institutions, you can really use that kind of to your advantage. And secondly, and I guess lastly, student privilege. Like it's really underrated. You are typically in more humble or curious positions. You're energetic about the world, and oftentimes that can really spark a conversation with someone. So don't undervalue that as well. So know your strengths. Networking is difficult. It's hard. If you're an extrovert, it could come easier to you. But I think sometimes introverts actually have this kind of magic power. I'm an introvert, especially in social situations. And the power of introverts is that we're kind of hyper conscious of being a burden on other people, right? So this means that we're likely to have a better framing when coming to messages. And I think that kind of book by Susan Cain, Quiet, with the quote, think about what you loved as a child, pay attention to what you gravitate towards, and pay attention to what you envy, is something we can all benefit from. So knowing your strengths is a super big plus when going into networking. So we've now talked about kind of some of the basics, some of that you may have known, but now we're going to talk about creating and maintaining your network. And this is kind of a bare bones version of kind of what I've delivered in the past, but I want to get onto the examples and leave time for some questions as well. So to network, you first got to understand like what you're interested in. This may seem something like a menial task, like I know what I'm interested in. sometimes people don't know what they're interested in. Some people don't know what excites them, what gets them up in the morning. But everyone's multi-dimensional, and here are some prompts for you to go away and think about and use when networking. It's important to remember that as postgraduates, you're alumni from a institution. It might be Queen Mary. It's so important to network with your peers. It's something that I didn't realize for a really long time until I graduated from university, and realized that there are going to be people around who you really want to stay in touch with. But if you're not in touch with them for a long time and you kind of come back to them, there's this kind of disconnect that could be construed as taking advantage of that person or otherwise. So keeping connected, staying in touch with people who you think are great people, or you think might go far, is really not a bad thing to do. The starting questions for when you're networking, and here we're genuinely and generally talking about people who are in higher positions of power, who you in companies that you might want to work for. So you could consider it that you have a lesser position in this regard, but what you need to do is figure out what you're giving to that person. So the starting question is, before forming any connection, should be, what can I give that's valuable to someone else, right? And here are some examples: news, experience, Twitter thread, that could constitute to a piece of value. So the first time when I'm trying to network with someone, what is the one thing I'm trying to give them? I'm not worried about what I can have. I'm more worried about what I can give them. And that equates that power imbalance that you may have had before, where you, for example, think that you're in a less position, but actually, you can use this as you're giving value to measure that up a little bit. So, but this is great, but how do you figure out what's valuable to someone else? Well, ultimately, you have to try and have a look at their LinkedIn profile. What does it say on there? What are they interested in? What's their area of expertise? What's something that may be emerging? A little bit of foresight, using your experiences that you've gained as university students, will be super useful here. So once you've got your piece of value, something that will be valuable to someone else, and even if you don't know if it'll be valuable to someone else, it's kind of important just to give it a shot anyway. There's some 3 things you have to know before you even try to network. And so the first is kind of purpose, right? You have to know why you're contacting. You shouldn't be contacting 400 people. You should be contacting 10 people that you definitely need to talk to. Your intentions. What are your intentions here? What do you want to get out of it? If you want a job, that's fine, but probably don't tell that person that you want that job first. Tell that person that you're interested in the industry. Tell that person, and so you can have long-term and short-term intentions, and that's completely fine. And then perspective. Think about the people that you want to connect with. These people are not, they are very busy people, typically. If you're wanting to network with them and you're unsure how to go about it, they're typically very busy people. So how can you make it so that you're not a burden on their time, or you don't feel like you're a burden on their time? And so you've got to understand the perspective that may be coming from theirs, and why they would or wouldn't respond to you. So here are some templates. There's no point screenshotting or whatever, because you'll get the slides anyway, and I'll go through this relatively quickly anyway. So I posted about my PhD last June. I got an overwhelming response. 50% of the people who reacted were not in my current connections. I added them on LinkedIn because they had consciously invested in a part of my life, whether they'd known it or not. And I sent them all this kind of message with the blanks filled in. It had about a 65% response rate, and I made some very good friends. Most were peers my age, so going back to that other point, and others were older. So this is definitely, it's a way to open a conversation. You want to stand out. I understand LinkedIn's a pretty saturated place, and so I wanted to kind of make a difference there. As many of us who kind of started networking as a numbers game, it's important to kind of check back with those who we previously connected with, who might at that moment provide some value to us. So this is the format of the message I sent to a contact I did this networking webinar with for the first time. And this message has about a 75% response rate, because you're already connected. So you're through the gate. You just need to now knock on the door. And this is for people you haven't been connected with before. This is the ideal 300-character message, in my opinion, to send someone as a personalized note. So when you press on LinkedIn, you go connect. It will say, do you want to add a personalized note? Always add a personalized note. So you've got to be direct, you've got to be honest, and you've got to be respectful. You don't want to be a burden on their time. So you want to leave it open and give them the kind of impetus to respond. You can ask, but do that in small doses and give an easy way out. These are kind of the main tips. And this, in a slightly extended form, will give you a perfect cold email as well. I've tried this a lot on LinkedIn, and it has about a 30% return rate on LinkedIn and a 55% return rate on email. One of the things that you can do to maintain your network super easy is developing a personal customer or client relation manager. It has a personal function as an address book, or otherwise you might know it as. I use it to stay in contact with family and professionals. You can do it physically or digitally, whatever works for you. The most important thing to have in here is the date that you last contacted someone and the kind of time frame you want to leave before contacting someone again. For professionals, this will typically be 6 to 9 months. Anything more than 12 months, you've got to kind of wonder why you want to stay connected with them. You can have this kind of automated, but whatever you can do to stay in mind, I'd try this tip. Most of what I've said, I kind of don't do consciously anymore. It comes from a place of caring and curiosity of maintaining contact. A good story that echoes this is when I came back from study abroad, a customer at the golf center I worked at came and asked me about what my plans were for summer. I wanted to get some internships and had already developed skills in geographical information systems. Given that I'd helped him with his golf swing and game over the past 2 years, he offered to send my CV to the company he worked for to see if I could get any work experience. About 8 months later, I was working there and I grew my network even further. So don't even undervalue those customer service jobs that you might do. They can lead to your next big thing. Now, this may be obvious, but kind of showing up and giving passively or actively engaging makes a world of difference. As I always say, you have to be equally valuable to them as you think they are for you. So giving a reason to stick around, and I assure you, you both won't regret it. So 2 examples I want to talk about here somewhat briefly is my MSc research, which was in the context of the pandemic. And I looked at the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is essentially a self-driving car hub project between a bunch of different stakeholders, government, companies, etc. And yeah, so I did this in COVID, and this is not, this is not directly just COVID related, but it's something important to remember that it was all online, it was all through email, it was all through networking, essentially. I never met a single person. And so there's 2 ways you can do this: stratified sampling, which is kind of divide and conquer. You divide your stakeholders into groups, and then you kind of randomly select or choose the most valued stakeholder within each group and contact them. And then when you get kind of good at that, you can get snowball sampling. So for example, when you have a chat with someone, you can then ask them to refer you on to someone else in the project, so you don't have to directly contact them. So this is a great, and to be honest, these are really great ways to build contacts in any other facet of it wasn't too clickbaity. It was kind of right on what I needed. I was referred, so I sent that kind of out. I was specific. I asked for an off-the-record chat before the interview, because this was one of those things around the Zoom interview kind of thing. You wanted to give them that kind of flexibility where that small talk would have already happened previously, and then kind of no commitments. And I think this is the perfect format for an email if you're ever going to send a cold email like this. In terms of LinkedIn, these are same messages that I sent out. Similar kind of thing here. I'm introducing myself and telling them who I am, why they should probably listen to me. I was interested in I told them what I was interested in, and then I also said to them I wanted to see if I could help them as well. So these are real examples. Feel free to copy them and use them in your own work. The outcome of this, I think, somewhat important to share, is that between May 2020 and June 2020, I spoke to 30 people. And in the end, because of stratified sampling and things like that, I conducted 10 interviews, and the project was highly successful. I got a first in this for my distinction in my MSc. So it does work, and it can work. You just got to be diligent about it. These are the people, broadly speaking, I spoke to, and I spoke to everyone kind of on this list. So yes, it can work, and it can work in a very short space of time. These are kind of some reflections for research. Some of this you would know. 10 interviews are manageable for a short turnaround time. The initial chat can be super risky, so be very careful about that. And it was totally secure. So briefly, just before we finish off, my newsletter, which Cameron shared in the chat, write about cities. I didn't see much on the market about writing about cities on a weekly basis. So I decided to start that. So for my very first one, I did cold LinkedIn and Twitter messages to figure out what makes up cities and who are the people working within cities. So I contacted the kind of range of people. This is an example of a passion project, which like kind of no one's getting anything materially out of except for me. But I could provide them with some value in the sense that I'm happy to promote some of their work. I'm happy to promote a project they're doing, you know, something like that. I'm able to give them a piece of value, but also I'm also delivering value to other people as well through the production of the newsletter itself. So these are examples of the connections that I gave. Twitter also works as well. You know, it's the same approach. Like all of this is pretty much the same. It's just the medium in which you do that in is super important depending on who you want to contact. So this was to an academic, for example. And then I got in contact with existing contacts. This is one of the big questions I get is how do you get in contact with someone you haven't talked to for a long time? And this is kind of one of the ways that I did that. It was actually someone from my master's, and I wanted to talk to them about this, and they were happy to talk to me. So it's a great way to stay in contact through your passion project. In the end, I sent 70 requests out. I got 20 completed responses, and that first newsletter was one of the reasons why I still write one today, although in a slightly different format. And if I have to reflect on this, it's that networking is intentional spontaneity. And I think that's the most magical thing about networking. This kind of casual magic that comes alive during networking is super important to remembering that every interaction is a negotiation, but every negotiation can lead to somewhere new. And I think if we can remember that as we move forward in life, we'll live happier, healthier lives for sure. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Daniel. That was incredible. That was really great. I think as someone who has tried to network since kind of I started on LinkedIn quite late, I think, compared to some of my people in my cohort. So yeah, there's stuff there that I haven't really thought about. So it's really great for myself to learn something new as well. So if anyone's got any questions for Daniel, please either type them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A function. While you do that, I do have a question myself to ask. So I think touching a little bit, I guess, about the COVID-19 context and that kind of thing, and kind of, I guess, how to go about approaching networking given that context. But do you think that networking has become more or less important given kind of the current situation in which we're living through?
I think it's always been important in the sense that, you know, there's this phrase that you hear through university, which is that, you know, there is what you know, and then there's who you know, and there's oftentimes when we're at university, we're hoping that what you know is much more important than who you know. But ultimately, I think it's slightly in the favor of who you know. And unfortunately, nepotism, which is the kind of idea of, you know, family relations giving you jobs and that sort of thing, is very much prevalent in the kind of dominant industries that people want to go into. And to break that cycle, like the way to do that is to get to people who, you know, are important, who you know. You know, for example, you know, Cameron and Tiana being QMSU executive, they've probably been able to, you know, meet a whole bunch of people that may be able to help them in the future or otherwise. And so getting involved in things that are directly leading you to speaking to the most influential people at an institution or a company or something like that is definitely one of the ways you can go about networking. So to answer your question directly, I think networking has become more important because limited resources means that companies are being very careful with where they're putting their finances and their money. And so I think it's something like 87% of jobs are found through not through job applications. So if you are able to network, you're able to provide value, you're definitely on the path to becoming a little bit more employable, I suppose, in that respect, even if you know everything. I think it's equally knowing people, but also knowing who you are and who you want to be in the workplace.
Awesome, thank you. No, I completely agree. And I think that's something that definitely this year through kind of like events like this, through Employable Me, that's something we've been trying to do, is connect people together. And it's obviously you come to the event to hear about the experiences and to learn something, but really it's kind of what you do after with that. So you've seen these people talk, please reach out to them, talk to them, connect with them on LinkedIn and kind of, I guess, and help each other. I myself have connected with a number of alumni throughout this year, people who I think I never would have connected with had the pandemic not happened. So yeah, I think that's something, a real valuable lesson to learn, that there's always a chance to network with someone. And I think what you said about kind of spontaneous and kind of course of that magic, I think it's a really good reflection on that. Does anyone else have any questions for Daniel?
Okay. Yeah, just a quick one. So you covered a lot, and that was really interesting, really useful. So for someone who is like starting their network from scratch, and also maybe for someone who you talk about how maybe introverts might have a bit of an advantage, but if someone is quite shy and quite new to that, what do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind for someone who's kind of starting from scratch, I guess?
I guess it's to remember that there are thousands of people out there who you could potentially connect with. So for example, I think a lot of the things that hold us back a lot of the times is kind of bad experiences. So if, for example, you're an introvert and you try it once and it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that opportunity is closed off. What it means is that opportunity just wasn't right, and it's kind of important to remember that it's not a zero-sum game. There is kind of value to be gained, but ultimately, like, if you decide that networking is not for you, you may actually be involved in networking in a way that's not actually, networking per se. So, for example, if you've got a friend group and you kind of meet up with that friend group every so often and you're very comfortable with them, and then someone says that, oh, I know that, you're looking for a job, let me just introduce you to them, I'll come with you, and we'll sit together and that sort of thing. You're networking, right? Like, you may not directly be doing networking, but there is a network being formed there. And so I think in that respect, it's kind of important to remember that you're not alone in this. There are people there to support you. And two, if you do want to start networking, you don't know how, you can go to, you can rewatch this webinar, or feel free to just get in contact. Happy to chat with you as well. I've done that on multiple occasions too.
Thank you. Yeah, that kind of networking without knowing you're networking, that's a good point. So thank you.
Do we have any questions at all for Daniel? I realized it was very, very comprehensive. So if you don't have any questions, that's also okay. But yeah, any questions at all from any of our audience members today? Again, no pressure. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, so if we don't have any questions, then I'd like to firstly thank you, Daniel, for your time today and for the presentation. I thought it was excellent, really, really informative. For our audience members, please check out Daniel on LinkedIn, connect with him. If you've got any questions, I'm sure Daniel will be more than happy to ask. Also, check out his newsletter, City Riffs, and the slides of the event will be shared with you afterwards via email. I'll send that round to you all. With Daniel's information as well. And also for our Postgraduate Fortnight, I posted in the chat. You can head over to the QMSU website at Postgraduate Fortnight and check out all the events we've still got planned for the rest of this week and next week, including our Diverse-ish event next Thursday. Tiana, do you want to just quickly maybe just a little plug there for your event?
I do love to plug my events. Yeah, so Diverse-ish is an anti-racist forum I set up last year as a space for students and staff to kind of share their experiences and learn from each other and share ideas. So we're having an event next Tuesday the 15th. I think it's at 5:30, and we're going to be talking about the postgrad gap, so the lack of diversity in postgraduate research and the barriers and deterrents that stop people of colour from pursuing research and kind of sharing experiences. And we'll be joined by two guest speakers, a PhD student from King's, I want to say, and an assistant lecturer from Nottingham, who are great and have great ideas to share. So if you are interested in that, then yeah, you can sign up on the website the same way that you signed up for this event, and hopefully it will be as good as this one.
Awesome, thank you, Tiana. In that case, I'll bring this this event to a close. Once again, thank you very much, Daniel, for the presentation. And yeah, hope everyone's having a lovely week, and yeah, enjoys the rest of Postgraduate Fortnight as well. So thank you, everyone.